I am the Reverend Dr. Judge Penny Brown Reynolds, and it is my pleasure on behalf of Dean Joseph Evans, the Dean of the Morehouse School of Religion at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, to have with us one of the most celebrated individuals that we could hope for, to be able to speak to us as we are in our 128th observation of our founding. The Reverend Al Sharpton, as Dr. Michael Eric Dyson has said, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., has conquered the American imagination. And so many of you know him, but we know that the sacred scripture says we give honor where honor is due. And if you give me just a moment, I would like to use the words of the genius of Dr. Michael Eric Dyson to introduce this incredible human being, incredible preacher, social justice advocate. And the words are coming from his book, and I definitely recommend this to you. It's called Rise Up, Confronting a Country at the Crossroads. Incredible book. I used it in my classroom where I teach as a professor at Georgia State. And then we're going to talk to him later on about his newest work that's come out called Righteous Troublemakers, Untold Stories of the Social Justice Movement in America. But right now, let me introduce him, if I can, by the words of Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. Al Sharpton has risen to cultural heights and wields enormous political authority because he came from the lowest rungs of society, but kept his compassion and love for the people. Although he has been a trumpet of conscience, he has not played just one song or sounded just one note. As a prophet, and I'm adding to this, a prophet he certainly is, he brings Black evangelical believers further into a progressive political he chastens white nationalists, like in my view, President Trump. He decries alternative facts. He champions women's rights. He supports LGBTQIA rights, and in fact, embraced gay marriage before the Black president he advised. He speaks and protests on behalf of immigrants. He tackles global warming, climate change, and environmental racism. And he provides a powerful model of principled activism, political resistance, and profound proclamation of social gospel. He is the founder of the National Action Network, host of MSNBC's Politics Nations, the host of his own radio show, Keeping It Real. He is a pastor par excellence, and it is indeed our honor for the Morehouse School of Religion to have him with us today for this intimate conversation. Good morning, Reverend Al Sharpton.
Well, good morning, Reverend Judge Reynolds. I'm very honored and happy to be with you, and certainly always happy to be with any part of the Morehouse family, particularly the School of Religion.
Thank you so much. I could not think of anyone better during this particular time in history than to have you, particularly after what has just transpired not only a few days ago, but I want to ask this question. What do you think is the greatest existential moment facing the Black church right now?
I think the greatest existential moment is that we are at a time that all of the things that we all came to normalize and feel that we had not any question that they would survive is all of a sudden facing an existential threat. The right to vote, the right to have easy access in terms of our developing ourselves in terms of financial stability, and even our health care, and even the nature of the climate. So when we now wake up in 2022 and 2021 before it, where all of a sudden we have a pandemic that shuts us down that we would never believe before 2021 that was possible. We have climate change that has caused all kinds of disasters. And while we are reacting to all of these natural shifts in where it seems that God is allowing the planet to go through, we are domestically faced with the right to vote being undermined and not protected. And we're undermined in terms of how our people can have health care when we are disproportionately in healthcare deserts. In the middle of all of that, where's the Black church? Because what made the Black church strong is that it addressed the time in which it was in, whether it was the founding of the AME Church in the 19th century or the Church of God in Christ in the 19th century, all the way to Dr. King and social justice in the 20th century. What made the Black church necessary and prophetic is that it would take an eternal word in a contemporary setting. And the word became flesh and necessary. And what I think the Black church's existential threat is that in the middle of the bigger, broader climate change threats, pandemic threats, and the more contemporary, prevalent threats of voting and all, we must stand up as a church with our unique voice, bringing our unique experience. Because if there's anyone, any tribe, any race on the planet that should be able to prophesy in the middle of catastrophe, it's the Black church, because we come from surviving catastrophes and disasters. We are the only ones that have the temperamental training to look at disaster in the face and not be rattled.
Outstanding. There's something going on in the land. I know that I am also, from being a judge and being a part of the clergy. We have Senator Warnock. I watch you on MSNBC, not only on your own show, but as an analyst in the morning. What I'm happy about is they don't just relegate you to Black issues. You'll be talking about things that's going on in Russia and a wide variety. But how have you managed? What advice would you give to faith leaders to be able to be in spaces like you have? You have been able to, and Dr. Eric Dyson, really, Michael Eric Dyson talks about it. You have an ability to be able to never stop being yourself. In 1 minute, you could talk about your love for James Brown, then you can quote scripture, and then you can speak about the social issues. How have you been able to manage putting all of those together to speak truth to power?
I think that what one must do is, I'll put it this way. Leslie McSpadden, who was the mother of Michael Brown, who was killed by police in Ferguson, Missouri several years ago. We were at a rally one night, and she got up and surprised me. She quoted Mark Twain. We had a Black rally around police abuse. And she says, I want to quote Mark Twain. And I'm like, Mark Twain? And she said, Mark Twain said, the two most important moments in your life is the moment you're born and the moment you find out why you were born. And I think it resonated with me. I think that we sometimes do not answer the calling as to why we were born, our calling in being faith leaders, our calling in being ministers. We try and fashion ourselves and model ourselves after others rather than discover us and let God enhance us by dealing with the gifts and the talents and the purpose he gave us. So I was growing up, my father left when I was 10. So I had a series of looking for father figures. And I got very interested in social justice very young age. I living in New York, born and raised there. I used to see Adam Crane Powell on television, and I loved his kind of persona. And I'm 12 years old, and I convinced my mother to let my sister bring me up to see him at his church. And I'd already been a boy preaching Church of God in Christ, so he had known who I was. He knew my pastor, Bishop F.D. Washington. So I loved Adam. And my mother got concerned, and she said, I'm going to bring you to Bishop Washington because I don't know if I want you out here. You get with them militants, you're going to lead the church. And my mother was a fundamentalist, Kojic, Pentecostal woman. And Bishop Washington said, I know what to do, and brought me to Reverend William Augustus Jones, who headed Dr. King's organization in New York. And Dr. Jones introduced me to Jesse Jackson, who was twice my age then. I was 12, 13. Jesse was around 26. They became father figures. But as I grew, later James Brown became a father figure when I met him at 18. As I grew, I never tried to be them. I tried to learn from them to add to me. And I think that many of us get lost in idolizing others rather than letting God use them to teach us, because there's nothing wrong with us. And God made you the way he wanted you to serve at a time and a space that you're in. And others add to it, not replace it. And I have too many ministers that I've met, especially young men and women, that are great mimics of great preachers rather than grow into being great preachers or great servants themselves. And nobody believes in a mimic because they can always go to the original. So you got to embrace that God made you to do something that no one can do like you, and everyone else helps to enhance you so you can learn that. And one of the things I came to terms with, Judge Reynolds, is that I could not be the next Bill Jones or the next Jesse Jackson or the next James Brown, but I could be the best Al Sharpton the world has ever seen.
Wow. That's a good word for those faith leaders who may be struggling. Let's turn a bit, if we can, to social justice. I went on and got a PhD. I graduated last year in criminal justice because you could not tell me that after the Trump administration, we would not be working on criminal justice reform. I was ready to go, had my diploma. I just thought at any moment. And then the White House came out with saying that they were not going to form a criminal justice commission, or they weren't going to do that. And they had the sanction or the support of the civil rights leaders. Do you know anything about that? And why do you think they didn't make that a priority at the start? You think that was a wise decision, or tell me about that?
When Biden came in, my position was that you said Black America had your back, you'd have Black America's back. You said that unsolicited by Black America the night you won. The priorities that I said to Biden is voting rights and criminal justice reform. What drove the outpouring of support that you got, you had the highest voter turnout in the history of this country for any presidential campaign. No presidential candidate ever got the amount of votes that you got. And what drove it was the threat to taking our vote and George Floyd and the litany of cases. If you're going to have our back, that ought to be our priority. How they were able to go around criminal justice and around voting and start with infrastructure and then Build Back Better is absolutely a mistake and wrong, because that is not what drove people. People did not stand in line for hours all over this country because Joe Biden was some great messiah. They stood in line because he was the alternative to the mess we had in Donald Trump, and because we felt he would deliver because he said on those issues. Now, he's been in there a year. They've blown the first round on voting rights and have not even really got to in the ring with criminal justice. We must stay on him, because even though we have seen some shift in criminal justice, it has not come legislatively. So yes, this year we were happy with the verdict of the Arbery killers in Brunswick, Georgia.
Yes.
That certainly I was involved in. We were happy with the verdict in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, around the case of Dante Wright, which we was always also involved in, and certainly George Floyd. But those are cases. We cannot, Judge Reynolds, play Russian roulette that every time I hope we win a case. We need the laws put in place. And
Yes.
if there ever was an administration that should put that criminal justice panel together, like you said, and be there to deal with reforms in the Justice Department and selection of judges, This is the administration, because that is why this administration got the vote it got.
That is outstanding. It should be a part to me of the domestic agenda that
Right.
we have to deal with criminal justice. Well, we know that we had a blow. It wasn't surprising and unexpected, but nonetheless, we cannot normalize it, where they refused, they being two senators in particular, but in the end, it's we're not going to let the Republican senators off the hook as well. We need some strategizing, and nobody can do that better than you, with the help of Mark Morial and all these others that are dealing with it. What message or what strategy would you recommend in the face of not being able to get the legislation that we thought was going to pass the United States Senate? What can we do in the faith community, in the Black community, in our activism? Lay it out for us in terms of a strategy now.
What we need to do is, I've said to Mark Morial and to Sherilyn Eiffel of Legal Defense Fund and Derek Johnson of NAACP, the civil rights leadership needs to demand and meet right away with Joe Biden as president and with Merrick Garland as the Attorney General. We need to go at three things. One, we need to know the Justice Department needs to go into the 19 states that have already changed state laws on elections and find out where there is violations in these laws of our civil rights, voting rights, and of the Constitution. It clearly says to me, and we've looked at some of this in the National Action Network, that some of these state laws on elections, gerrymandering, where it cherry picks based on race and based on registered voters, some of this is a violation of law that the Justice Department needs to move and have it stayed by the courts. Second, we need to have the president do what he can with executive order. And we need to deal with that right now in terms of dealing with the executive order that the president can do some of this stuff. And thirdly, we need the strategy on how we energize our community. And they cannot do it without the Black church, saying that one of the reasons we're in this shape is because we only had 50 Democrats. We need to punish those right wingers so that we will not only deal with the filibuster, but won't need it if we can put 60 in, because you have enough seats up that if our people come out and know what's at stake, that we can get it done. But that's why Joe Biden must show that what we want will be the priority, so that our people will come out in the numbers. If we come out in numbers we came out in 20, we will have a majority of the Senate, not a tide, hoping that Vice President Harris can break the tie.
I think that's a great strategy, because I think that we're underestimating what can be done without the benefit of the law. We want the law, but as you're saying, the Justice Department has the legal tools to address many of these issues, and by executive order. Even
Right.
with criminal justice reform, with de-escalation, you could tie to government grants. I mean, there's a lot that can be done. One of the concerns, we just lost in Atlanta a man by the name of the Happy Preacher, Elder Cal Morrell. I know you know of him. He
Very well.
Oh yeah.
I loved him. I mean, I never wanted to come to Atlanta and speak or preach. It didn't matter if I was doing a rally or a sermon. I'd look for the Happy Preacher. He would give you a spirit. I really was so saddened when I heard he had made his transition.
Absolutely. One of the things, he was a dear friend of mine, always supporting me, but his heart was breaking over these last 2 months. Church doors have been closed, and we're doing it virtually, and I understand. What do you see as a post-COVID future for the Black church? I know you preach all over, but has that been altered? What do we do if we want to mobilize our people when the church doors have been closed?
It's very hard. We certainly have dealt with virtual churching, but people need to feel and commune. And I think that the church has to serve. We've worked with the Conference of National Black Churches, Reverend Dr. W. Franklin Richardson, who chairs the board of NAN, in getting COVID testing and all of that vaccination. The church needs to be knee-deep involved in bringing us out of this pandemic so that we can again assemble in person as we build our virtual ministries. One of the things that I think is important is that a lot of churches are finding out they're reaching more people virtually than they would have had in the church. But the question is reaching them to do what? And we cannot just preach at them. We must preach to them and give them assignments like voting, like making sure the people in your neighborhood are vaccinated, like making sure people are informed. But I think there was, Reverend Judge Reynolds, a ray of a light that really did something that inspired. When I was doing the Arbery trial, the parents of Ahmaud Arbery and Attorney Ben Crump called me soon after Ahmaud Arbery was killed. This is way before George Floyd last year. And I had not heard of the case and had not gotten a lot of national attention. So I put them on my show on MSNBC and helped bring it national. And I stood with them all the way through. They came to me with me to the March on Washington all the way through. So I was always very much strengthened by the faith of that mother. Wanda kept saying, God will make a way. And at first they did not, as you remember, we want to arrest those guys that killed Ahmaud. And then the prosecutor said they saw no reason to arrest. Finally, we raised enough attention to even Governor Kemp said, no, there needs to be something done. Got a new prosecutor, got the indictment. Then they picked the jury. 11 whites, 1 black, 12-member jury in Brunswick, Georgia. And as you know better than me, Brunswick is not Atlanta. This is in rural Georgia. So I started trying to prepare them. This may not come with a guilty verdict, but we got it into court, And Wanda kept saying, no, the Lord will make a way. I went to Savannah to preach about 2 weeks before the trial started, and Wanda and the father, Marcus, came to hear me preach, held a press conference and asked me to come to the trial. And I said I would. I went, sat in the back row with them. And the next day, the lawyer got up in court and said, I understand Al Sharpton was here. We do not want no more black pastors. I had left Brunswick.
Oh, I remember that.
And I was in St. Louis, and some reporters ran up to me and said, did you hear what the lawyer said in the courtroom in Brunswick? And out of my mouth, I said, well, if you don't want me, we're going to come back with 100 black preachers. And I don't even know why I said it. And I called Bishop Reginald Jackson of AME Church there in Georgia. I called Reverend Jamal Bryant, and we picked the day and called for 100 black ministers to meet me in Brunswick. 310 showed up. And I think that as God would have it, that showed many black doubters the strength of the black church. Because when you got a verdict in the deep South of 11 whites and one black in the jury, and you had to remember now, those 11 whites have to live in that town, having sent 3 of their neighbors to jail for life for killing a black boy. And the picture that will come out of that trial is all these black preachers standing around the county courthouse. That is the message the black church has to send. You can't talk about 21 without showing that picture. And that's what we got to be. We have to be involved. People will come to us if we come to them. But we can't lead people we don't even like. And we can't speak for people that we don't speak to and feel their pain and understand that Jesus taught us to be with the afflicted, be with the rejected. Jesus did not come to teach at seminary. Jesus came to be with the disaffected, the woman at the well, the one with the issue of blood, Bartimaeus, the blind man. And that's where we must be. The work you do in criminal justice. We got to deal with who's going to turn our kids around that think they were only born to be hustlers and dope dealers and pimps, which is what the culture is telling them. You look at social media and you look at these television shows that are on all of these stations, all of them, the definition of success is pimping and dope dealing and all of that. There are no shows that show them how to do it legitimately. The ones that have to come in and teach that is the black church, because it always was, and that's our role.
Wow, I mean, you preaching right now to me, and sometimes the preacher needs to hear a word. Let me ask you this, Reverend Sharpton, you have had courage for a long time. You don't always do what's popular, but I always feel like in my heart you do what's right. And sometimes it's not popular. Where did you get this courage from to really speak up?
You know, I have to say from the church, growing up in the Church of God in Christ and then later Baptist, I started preaching when I was 4 years old. I remember the junior usher board, and the junior usher board adult advisor asked us what we wanted to do for the junior usher board anniversary. And I said I wanted to preach, and all the other kids laughed. And she said, no, maybe God's called them. Took me to the bishop, and they let me preach the anniversary, about 900 people there. So if you grow up talking to hundreds of people and you 6, 7, 8 years old, I was finally licensed when I was 10, you kind of always know you're a little different. Hard to hang out with other kids because their parents go to hear you preach on Sunday. So it gave me the sense of I had to be strong enough to be different. And that strength made me always understand that if God would use you at a young age, that whatever God would put you to do, he would protect you. And my bishop used to tell me, faith is not what you can figure out. Faith is what does not make sense, but you know you need to do it anyway. And your job is to stand up. God's job is to hold you up. So it's my faith that made me do things that wasn't popular. And some of the things that I've done that were not popular has become popular. Sometimes you've got to take a stand. When we started fighting police brutality, they call us everything. Now everybody's trying to get on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon. That was not popular when I started. So sometimes you have to do what is right and it will become popular. But even if it doesn't, it's still right. And I think I say all the time, the basis of my activism is my ministry. People say to me, you chose to be an activist rather than a minister. No, that is my ministry. My ministry is not to pastor a church. My ministry is social justice. Those that pastor, that's their ministry. It's not one or the other. God gives us different things to do at different places, even in the same era and the same time.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I tell people that all the time when they ask me. My religion is social justice. Period. I'm a Baptist. I understand that. I'm a pastor, but in the end, that's for me. My religion is social justice. I want to ask two questions. Before we leave, why do you believe America has normalized the oppression of Black people?
It was built on it.
Not dealing with slavery, but now.
I think it was built on it. And just like we sing hymns that was passed down through generations, and we know stories that has been passed down through generations, it has been passed down through generations to many whites, white supremacy. And they just are raised with feeling that they're superior. Doesn't mean their parents taught them the N word, but it means that they just know from the socioeconomic arrangement that they're supposed to be at a different level. And they've normalized that. And we've got to normalize the unacceptance of that and turning that around.
Yeah, I like that. The final piece I want to talk about is this Righteous Troublemakers, the untold stories of the social justice movement in America. I know why you wrote the book, because we all know I have deacons in my church that worked at the factory and they somehow had to integrate that, and nobody knows those stories. Why did you feel compelled as a New York Times bestseller to tell those stories that no one knows about?
You know, when I did the first eulogy of George Floyd, there was 3 funerals. I did the first and the last. In the middle of the eulogy, I just felt called to call for a march on Washington. And Martin Luther King III, who works very closely, we worked together, was sitting there, and he looked at me like, what are you talking about March on Washington? We haven't prepared for this. We don't know where we're going to get the money. And after the sermon, we talked and we said we got to do it. We only had 2 months. We raised the money. National Action Network helped to organize it. And it was about 200,000 people there in the middle of a pandemic, August 28, 2021. We had people's temperatures checked coming in. Everybody said, don't do it. The pandemic over 200,000 people come. We're on our way to the steps to speak, where Martin Luther King Jr. spoke the same day in 1963. And there's an old man in the crowd, Reverend Judge Reynolds, that's standing up with some object in his hand, trying to get my attention. And there's throngs of people. I told you, tens of thousands of people there. But for whatever reason, he caught my eye. And I told the security that was moving us through, I said, tell that old man to come here, find out what he's trying to say. And when he came, he showed me this button that said, March on Washington, Freedom Now. And he said, I wore this button in 63 to this march. I'm in my 80s, and I wanted to be here today with you. And he said, that's all. And he went back in the crowd. And it haunted me because I said, nobody know this man's name. Nobody know how he got here. But he took his own money in his own time and came here. And he won't be in the Washington Post tomorrow. He won't be on MSNBC or CNN tonight. He came because he's a righteous troublemaker. And we need to tell the stories of people that never got well known, but did pivotal things that had it not been for them, we wouldn't be where we are. So if I ask people, including students there at Morehouse, do you know Claudette Colvin? Most of them wouldn't know. Claudette Colvin was a young woman arrested for not giving up her seat in front of the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, 9 months before Rosa Parks was arrested. They did not fight and make her a symbol because she was dark-skinned and pregnant and unmarried. I tell her story. There's a lady named attorney Pauli Murray. Most folks never heard of her. She wrote all of the legal theories that some of which Thurgood Marshall used in Brown versus the Board of Education Supreme Court. But they wouldn't exalt women in the 50s. And she was gay. I write her story. I want people to know that God uses rejected stones to build movements so they can be encouraged to know no matter what mistakes you've made in life, no matter how people look at you, because we have colorism and classism in our community, that shouldn't get in the way of you being a troublemaker, good trouble, as John Lewis said, and stand up for God. Because God has a habit of taking some extraordinary people to do extraordinary things. And that's the whole theme of the book. For people at the end of the book saying, if these people can make these contributions, I have no excuse.
Wow, I can't wait to get it. I know this one and what it did for me in terms of laying out some critical analysis that I needed. I guess the final thing, we're an HBCU and we know the value of historically Black colleges. I am amazed, as you just said, that the students are not connected to our story. They're not connected to our sacrifice. If we don't make them connected, we won't mobilize them to go out and vote again. What do you say as the closing remarks for this conversation that you can say to encourage those persons at HBCUs, these young people, that all is not lost, it's not hopeless, and that we still have an opportunity to turn this thing around for us?
Two things. One is that if you think times are bad now, think how bad they were for your grandparents, for our parents, who had to sit in the back of buses, who couldn't even drink from a water fountain, couldn't check in a hotel. What you take for granted came out of struggle. And if we are to inherit the struggle, then we can also give your children in 40 years what your parents gave you. They gave you a life that they never had. My mother and father never went to college, but they were able to put me in college. They never dreamed. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, but my mother was born and raised in Alabama, Dothan, Alabama. My father in Walbassett, Florida. They couldn't vote in their hometowns until their late 30s, but their son ran for president of the United States. So you have an obligation to, in your generation, not to complain, but to pick up the reins of others that didn't complain, which is why you can go and do what they could not go and do, including financing your own HBCUs. Don't let people see your power that you don't see yourself. That's why when this nation was at a crossroads, Joe Biden came to Morehouse and Atlanta Clark to speak, because he recognized if they're going to sustain any success, we're the ones that have to do it. Don't let others see us bigger than we can see ourselves. You've come for such a time as this. You have more to work with. Do you understand? Martin Luther King and Fannie Lou Hamer, that generation, turned this country around, and they didn't even know what a cell phone was, didn't have a fax machine. They took a rotary telephone and telegrams and took on the most powerful country in the world. We got everything to work with: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, communicate 50 different ways and don't have nothing to say. We need to use all at our disposal to turn around. We are the children of those that have done it before. My last point on that, you said not even going back to slavery, but let me go here on slavery. I thought about this during the pandemic. We've been through pandemics before. When we went across the Atlantic Ocean, those millions that died coming across in the slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade, died. Those that made it were the ones that survived the pandemic, survived the storms in the ocean, survived people chained to them that were dead and they couldn't unchain them, had to sit in their own whatever they had to do to move their bodies. All of that. Couldn't go to the restroom, sat there and made it across the Atlantic, which means we are the direct children of the strongest Africans that ever lived, because weak ones never made it across the Atlantic. So don't turn into no weakened now. You're not, in your blood is the blood of the strongest Africans this world has ever seen. Stand up and show your strength. Know who you are. They're trying to tell you who you're not. They even let people in the culture tell us we're nothing but N's and B's. That's not who we are. And if we would come to ourselves, that's what the children of Israel had to do on the mountain. That's why they wandered. They started worshiping the gods of the oppressor rather than the God that made them free.
My. Well, now I see why, without a doubt, when Dr. Michael Eric Dyson compared you to Dr. King by saying that you conquered the American imagination. And I really think now that you did it because you remained being yourself. I know you're from New York, but you sound like a good old country preacher at the same time that you're being a prophet. And I wonder to myself, I know we're off now, but could you have imagined your life turning out like this? Your mother must have just been, I mean, you are just phenomenal. You're everywhere. I don't know where you get all this energy from,
Well,
other than exercising early in the morning.
I couldn't have imagined it, but I praise God for it. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.